This is Whitney for Weddings Done Well, and today we are going to be talking about venues. We're working within your planning checklists and specifically talking about your 18-month plus planning checklist. So if you're using the Weddings Done Well checklist and following along, then head over to the 18-month plus and it's item 9, which is finding your perfect venue. So in order to really help you through that process, I actually created a list of questions, and you can also find those on weddingsdonewell.com. They're free, so just head over to the tools page and then you will find a PDF called Questions to Ask Potential Venues. There's also a place for your notes. So this list of questions is one that I've compiled over the last over 10 years, and it's just the questions that I think every couple who's touring a potential venue needs to ask. There are a lot of tips that I'm going to share with you in this video as we go through this list of questions together, okay? So go ahead and get that, download it, have it in front of you, and let's get started. So as we go along with these questions, I'm gonna organize them in the video so that there's a little title before each question. So if there are certain ones that you just can breeze right through because you get it and you just don't need any further clarification, feel free to skip through. Just kind of go around the video, skip to the title slides that are the questions that you need answers to. Okay, so item 1 is ask your venue, or the potential venue, whether there's a site coordinator or site director or site manager. There are a lot of different titles, but basically what you want to know is whether with the package that you book at the venue, there's a person that comes along with it that is going to help you in the process to ensure that your vision is properly executed. Okay, so I want to talk to you about what a site manager is. This is the person who is going to be in touch with you a few times throughout the planning process, and they're going to be responsible for making sure that everything is set up to your liking. So if the venue includes things like tables, chairs, linens, things like that, they're going to be responsible for making sure that they have the right tables in the right places with the right counts, that the right number of chairs are at each table, that the correct linen is put on each table. If you're gonna have your ceremony, cocktail hour, and reception at the venue, then they're gonna be responsible for setting up each site according to your wishes. This is someone that you're probably gonna talk with maybe 3 or 4 times throughout the planning process. They're probably gonna want a copy of your timeline, and they'll wanna confirm the details of your timeline, and they're gonna want your counts. They're gonna wanna know how many total guests you're gonna have, whether they be adults or children. If they're gonna be doing different meal options like steak or fish or vegetarian, they're gonna need to know those counts. So this is a person that you'll be in touch with, not regularly necessarily, but they're gonna just need to know the information that they'll then use to bring your venue to life the way that you've envisioned it. So that's their responsibility. Their responsibility is really to the venue and making sure that that goes smoothly. And the reason that I am kind of specifying that the venue is their responsibility is because it is often a mistake made by couples that they think that a site manager or a site coordinator is the same thing as them bringing in their own wedding coordinator. So I've heard couples say, oh, I don't need to hire a wedding coordinator. That's great because the venue includes a site coordinator. That is not true. Because the site coordinator, their responsibility is to the venue, but not necessarily to you. They're not going to be responsible for making sure that you have all your vendors or that you have referrals for the best ones. They're not going to help you interview potential vendors. They're not going to help you negotiate prices. They're not going to look over contracts for you. They're not going to assist you in finding a venue for your rehearsal. They're not going to update your budget. They're not going to do anything like that. The things that have to do with you and your wedding planning, that's exactly what your wedding coordinator is going to do. The things that have to do with your venue and making sure that that's set up properly is what the site manager is going to do. So the best possible scenario is to have that site coordinator and also have your own wedding coordinator, because between them, they'll have all the bases covered. So as you are touring potential venues, you should find out, is there a site manager and what can I expect of them? How much time will they spend with me? What's reasonable in terms of the number of times I can call them? What are their hours? Things like that. You should also find out on your actual wedding day whether they themselves will be present. And I'd actually go one step further and say, when will they be present? Like, what time do they arrive and what time do they depart? Like, at what point of the wedding do they typically depart? And the reason that I mentioned that is because as a wedding coordinator, I can't tell you how many times I was at a wedding and found that the site coordinator really only ever walked up, said hi, wished the couple well, checked to make sure that they were happy with the setup, and then took off and we never saw them again. So if this is someone that you're gonna lean on, and if it's someone that you really like and have grown close with and you consider them a support, then you're probably gonna wanna make sure that they're actually gonna be there on your wedding day. So I would ask that in advance. One last thing, sometimes venues will actually require that you hire a wedding coordinator. They don't typically require that you hire one for like a full service package, that would be up to you, but they do usually want a day of coordinator. So if they're going to require that you hire a wedding coordinator, usually it's just for a day of package. Okay, so find that out as well. And if they do have that requirement, then you can consider the cost of a day of coordinator part of the cost, the total cost of that venue, because it's required. So you can't have that venue without that coordinator, which means, let's say the venue cost is $15,000 and a day of coordinator is another $1,500, then really the cost of the venue is $16,500. Does that make sense? So question number 3 is whether there's a requirement that you use specific vendors. So let me talk to you about a few key terms that you might hear. Required vendor list and preferred vendor list. So a required vendor list, as the term entails, means that you are required to use those vendors. So the venue is very specific about the vendors that they will allow to come work on the property, and they will not allow you to use vendors outside that list. And that doesn't necessarily apply to every type of vendor. They're usually most specific with the caterer, the bartending company, and the rentals company, and that's because they have a direct effect on the venue. If they've worked with caterers that have done a horrible job and maybe damaged the property, or they've worked with rentals company that have scratched the floors, sometimes they get a little concerned that not ever happen again, and so they compile a list of the vendors that they've approved, and then they require that you use that list. Preferred vendors are vendors that the venue likes. So it's vendors that have worked there in the past, and the venues thought that they did a great job. You don't have to use them. The venue's just giving it to you as a courtesy. They're like, hey, if you want a great caterer, they've worked here and they were great. And then some venues don't have a required list or a preferred list. They just allow you to bring in the vendors that you'd like to use. So find out when you're touring the venue where this venue falls. And if they have a required vendor list, definitely ask to see it. And the reason that I say that is because you want to make sure that they too are within your budget. You don't want to book the venue and then find out that you can't afford the vendors that are allowed to work there. So my little side note there is that sometimes if a vendor knows that you have to use them, like they're on the required list, they're less flexible with you. They're not as willing to negotiate their prices because they know they don't have to. So it's something to think about. If there's a required list of vendors, you might even go and try and get a quote from them before you book the venue, just to make sure you're happy with their price and that it fits comfortably within your budget. So the next question is whether or not liability insurance is required of you and of your vendors. You're gonna wanna know that because again, it's an additional cost. If you have to bring in liability insurance, you're gonna wanna find out what that will cost you. In my experience, liability insurance costs between $300 and $400 for a policy that's up to $1 million. So if the venue requires that you have $1 million worth of coverage, it's probably gonna cost you somewhere between $300 and $400 for that day of policy. If you're a homeowner, you should check your homeowner's insurance because oftentimes you can actually just build that into your homeowner's insurance and save some money there. With your vendors, find out if they're going to be required to have liability insurance. And that's something for you to keep in mind because as you go out and start booking vendors, you're going to want to ask them whether they carry liability coverage. If they don't have coverage, then they're either going to have to buy a policy for that day or they're not going to be able to be your vendor. But you don't want to go ahead and book them and give them a deposit and then later find out they don't have insurance because chances are you're going to have to go find a new vendor and you'll have lost your deposit. So item 5 is pretty easy. You just want to know if the venue makes any accommodations for people with mobility issues. That's especially true if your ceremony and your reception are far apart from each other or if there's a hill involved, if the parking area is kind of far from the ceremony site, that sort of thing. Just find out what accommodations they make, and if they don't make any, see what they do, what they've done in the past to accommodate. The next question is finding out what time your guests need to leave the venue. And the reason that that's an important one is because if there's a contracted time, let's say you decide on 10 p.m. and you still have guests there at like 10:30, you might get charged. So put that in writing. And I'm gonna say that a million times as you'll see in these planning checklists, put everything in writing. My side note here is that sometimes site managers are incentivized to book clients. So for every wedding they book, they make money, okay? Which means that they have a lot of motivation to book weddings, which often means that they will say things and make promises that they don't necessarily intend to keep, or they will kind of oversimplify things like, oh yeah, if you're not out of here by 10, it's no big deal. They'll say things that you need to hear in order to book. And I'm not trying to say that the whole industry is unethical, or there aren't some great site managers that are completely truthful and forthcoming. Usually they are, but in my experience, I've seen several that weren't. And it's just the way it goes. I mean, it's just the way it goes with anything. People will say what you need to hear in order to get you to book. So everything that they tell you, especially when they make promises or tell you that they can like bend the rules or make special exceptions, say, okay, great, can I see that in writing? Because on your wedding day, you really don't want any unpleasant surprises. And also there's a good chance that the site manager that you book with is not the site manager there on your wedding day or there to collect the payments. And then you could say, oh, but I talked to this person. And they could say, oh, this person doesn't even work here anymore. Or this person isn't on your wedding. Or no, I don't think they said that. I can't imagine that they said that. And if you don't have it in writing, you really don't have anything to stand on. So the next one, is there a service charge on top of the bill? Usually there is a service charge. They're sort of called the plus sign. So it's like the price plus service fees, plus gratuities, plus whatever. So find out what those pluses are so that you can really get an accurate sense of what your final cost is going to be. Next one, if the venue provides catering, you want to know, is there a food and beverage minimum? So what that means is you are guaranteeing that you will spend a certain amount. So let's say the food and beverage minimum is $20,000. You're going to let them know that some way you're going to spend $20,000, whether that be the cost per person, or you're going to upgrade your meals so that it's filet mignon, or you're going to give away cookies at the end of the night. But either way, you will kind of climb to that minimum. If the minimum is low enough that you know you'll meet it easily, great. But if you don't think you'll meet it easily, then that might need to be negotiated, because I've seen so many couples be like, okay, what else can we give them? Can we upgrade the bar? Can we give them cookies? Can we give them chocolate covered strawberries? Like, what else can we throw in because we have to meet our minimum? And it kind of becomes ridiculous and excessive. And you don't want to do that. You just want to find a minimum that you know you're going to meet and that you're comfortable with, and then it's fine. So the next question you'll want to ask has to do with the alcohol. If the venue already provides alcohol, if they have a bar on site, then that's already taken care of. But if they don't, and you want to serve alcohol to your guests, then you might need to get some more information. For instance, do you need to bring in an outside bartending company? And if so, are there any requirements? Do they need to have their own liability insurance? Do they need to have a special liquor permit? Find out what the venue requires of them. Also, the venue might tell you that you need to bring in security, 1 guard per however many guests if there's alcohol. And in that case, you want to find out what the security requirements are as well. The same is going to go for fire. If you're planning on using flames in your wedding, like you want to light candles or use candelabras or things like that, you want to use real fire, find out what the requirements are. Is fire okay? Does it need to be in a certain glass of a certain height? Is there a clearance between the tip of the flame and the top of the glass that the flame is inside? Can the flame be outside of a glass? Can it just be like a candelabra where the flame is exposed? Find that information out as well. And I'll tell you that a lot of venues are actually getting away from real flames and telling couples that they need to use LED candles, which are those little battery powered candles. Now that's not the end of the world, because if you put those in a colored glass or a frosted glass and you get the kind that flickers, then it's actually a pretty convincing alternative. But again, if your heart is set on flames, find out whether they actually allow real fire. The next question has to do with who is responsible for setup and tear down. Is there a team at the venue that'll help set everything up and then tear it down at the end of the night? Or does that responsibility fall on you? Do you need to hire outside staff? Do they have requirements of who you can use? Get all that information in advance so that you can plan accordingly. So our next question is about parking and what kind of parking is offered at the venue. You're gonna wanna find out what the venue already has. Like, most venues have a parking lot. Now, is that a kind of lot that the guests can just park their own car and walk in? Or is there a charge for self-parking? Is valet required? Is there a fee for valet? Is that already built into the venue's fee, or is that an additional fee? You're gonna need to find all that out, and if it is an additional fee, then you're gonna consider that additional fee a part of the total price of choosing that venue. So the next question has to do with a plan B. What would happen in inclement weather or unforeseeable circumstances? And now I know that unforeseeable circumstances means you can't predict them, and so you probably can't ask about what would happen in the case that one should be a part of your wedding day. But you might ask, like, what are some things that have happened in the past, some reasons that people have had to make last minute changes, and how did you accommodate those? You should also find out, like, let's say you're having an outdoor ceremony or an outdoor reception. In the case of rain, what would you do? Would you move to a different location? Would you have to bring in tenting? If you had to bring in tenting, how far out would you need to make that call? Just get the information, and then hopefully you don't even need it. So the next question has to do with a corkage fee. And if you don't know what a corkage fee is, what it means is you can bring in your own bottle of wine, but the venue charges a fee for you to open it. So that could actually be a pretty big cost saver. Depending on what kind of wine you bring in and what kind of wine they offer, you know, you'll have to kind of do the math. But if you could go to a place like Costco or Bevmo and buy wine in large quantities, you might find that it's worthwhile to spend the money on the wine and pay the corkage fee, and you'll still come out ahead. Because the industry standard tends to be a 3 times markup. So whatever a bottle of wine retails for, they're gonna charge 3 times that amount. So do the math, find out if it's a good idea for you, and then find out what the corkage fee and whether or not the venue will allow you to bring in wine from outside. So the next question has to do with the photographer and videographer and whether there are any potential restrictions that you'll need to know of. Some venues are really picky about where photographers can shoot or where they can stand at specific times. Sometimes they require that the photographer and or videographer have a permit. So find out this information so that you can plan ahead. Also, if you want to take your engagement photos at your venue, find out if that's okay. See if you can come ahead of time, like way ahead of time, and take your photos there. And is there an additional fee? Is there a permit required? Those are good things to know. The next question has to do with any additional costs. Just ask, are there other costs that we're not talking about right now? Is there a cleanup fee? Is there a security fee? Am I gonna pay an additional cost per hour if I wanna come in ahead of time? What have I not thought of that is a fee I might see in my final bill? Your next question has to do with how many weddings could potentially be taking place at your venue on your wedding day. Now that might mean there could be a wedding before yours, and it might mean there might be a wedding or several weddings going on at the same time as yours. For some couples, that's a deal breaker. They want to reserve a venue that is going to be theirs for the entire time that they're using it for their wedding. Other couples choose a venue that's huge and they don't really mind if a couple other weddings are going on at the same time, as long as they're not causing any interruptions. You can't even really hear them. You're not too aware of their happenings. So it's up to you, and of course it has to do with the specifics of the venue that you're looking at. But you might want to find out how many weddings could potentially be happening and what accommodations the venue makes to ensure that there isn't any crossover between guests, that they're not getting lost, that they're not accidentally sitting down at the wrong wedding, and to make sure that you can't hear the other weddings that are happening. Also, sometimes in order to ensure that the weddings don't hear each other, there's a certain noise ordinance or like a decibel level that you can't go above. So find out what that is and make sure that you're comfortable with it, because if it means that your wedding has to be particularly quiet so as not to interrupt anything else, if you're the kind of person that wants loud music and a good party, that might be a deal breaker. So just, get all that information. I'd also find out what other restrictions there are that you need to know about. I've coordinated weddings at venues that don't allow flower petals. Or sparklers. Sparklers are another really popular one, and sometimes venues don't allow them. So find out what restrictions there are for like some of the common wedding things, just so that you're not caught off guard. The next question has to do with lighting and power, and you just want to know, especially if your wedding is going to go into the evening, is the venue properly lit? Or is there anything you have to do in addition to what's already supplied to ensure that your guests can see properly? Same with power. Is there going to be enough power to power everything that you're going to have at your wedding, your DJ, your lighting, whatever the case may be. If generators are required, or if additional power is required, if you're bringing in special, like let's say there's enough power for a DJ, but if you're bringing in a 16-piece band, there wouldn't be enough power. So find out what's required and find out what's provided, and then just kind of go from there. So the last and final question has to do with any changes that are going to be made to your venue. So what I mean by that are things like taking down a wall, or adding a building, or adding a room, or redecorating, or remodeling, or just any kind of changes that the venue has in mind, and how you would be alerted should any changes occur. Now, usually these are good things. Usually this is freshening up and sprucing up, or it's like an additional room that you can use as a bridal suite, or whatever the case may be. Usually this is great news. But sometimes, in my experience, couples have been disappointed by changes that were made. For instance, once we were coordinating a wedding for this couple that was getting married outdoors, and it was like this really beautiful lawn setting, and they loved the real grass. But the venue ended up switching that real grass for artificial grass. And when the couple got there on the day of their rehearsal, they looked around and they're like, what is going on? This is not what we had in mind. So make sure you know of any changes that are in the works or on the horizon, and make sure that they are going to let you know of any changes, whether they see them as good or bad changes. Just make sure that you are alerted so that you don't show up and have an unexpected surprise. Well, there you go. Questions to ask your potential venues as you tour them. I hope those are helpful questions, and feel free to add to them. As I mentioned before, there is a place for you to add notes. So while you're there, make sure you're notating everything. Don't assume that you're gonna remember, because after you've toured 10 venues, you're like, wait, which is the one that had that beautiful lawn? Or what did they say their policy was about the bar? So just write it down, keep it with you as you're going, and I promise you, it'll make your life much easier. Make sure that you are subscribed to Weddings Done Well. Hit the subscribe button below, because we are gonna be going over questionnaires like this and going through all the planning checklists and talking about all things weddings. This is going to be your one-stop shop for everything you need to know as you plan your big day. So make sure that you're subscribed, and also if you have a question for me, if there's something that I can answer that I haven't answered in this video, please feel free to put it in the comments below. I will be so happy to make a special video just for you. This is very much an interactive process, and I want you to feel like I am your planner and I'm your guide and resource all along the way. So comment with your question and I will be happy to answer it for you. Happy planning.